It was a cold night, and the kind of cold that does not just touch your skin but settles deep into your bones and makes you feel alone in ways you cannot explain. And there she stood outside a door that used to be hers, holding a small worn-out bag with hands that were shaking, not from the cold, but from the weight of what had just happened. The man she once loved, the man she trusted with her heart and her future, had just closed that door on her like she was nothing, like all those years meant nothing, like she was just another mistake he wanted to forget. And the silence that followed was louder than any scream she had ever heard. She did not knock again because something inside her had already broken, something that told her this was not just a moment of anger, this was the end. And as she turned around, she realized she had nowhere to go, no plan, no safety, no one waiting for her, just an empty street and a future she could not yet see. And the rain began to fall slowly, at first as if the sky itself was unsure, and then heavier, like it understood her pain and wanted to share it with her. She walked with no direction, her shoes soaked, her clothes heavy, her heart heavier. Every step felt like a question she could not answer. Where do you go when the place you called home is no longer yours? Where do you go when the person who promised to protect you becomes the one who leaves you behind? And yet she kept walking, because stopping would mean giving up, and something deep inside her refused to let that happen. That night she slept on a bench under a dim streetlight, curled into herself, trying to stay warm, trying to stay strong. And as she stared into the darkness, she made a quiet promise, not out loud, not for anyone else to hear, but for herself. She promised that this would not be the end of her story. She promised that one day she would rise from this pain and build something so strong that no one could ever take it away from her again. The days that followed were not kind. They were long and unforgiving, filled with moments that tested her in ways she never imagined. She took whatever work she could find, cleaning floors, washing dishes, carrying boxes, jobs that left her body tired, but her mind still restless, because survival was not enough. She needed something more, something that would lead her out of this darkness. There were nights she cried quietly, not because she was weak, but because she was human, because pain needs a place to go, and sometimes tears are the only way it escapes. But even in those moments she never let herself stay down for long. She would wipe her face, take a deep breath, and remind herself of that promise she made on that cold night. People passed her every day, some noticing her struggles, some pretending not to see, but she learned something important during those days. She learned that no one was coming to save her, and that realization did not break her. It made her stronger. It made her understand that if her life was going to change, it would be because she changed it. One evening after a long shift, she sat outside a small building, watching people come and go, dressed in confidence, carrying themselves with purpose, and something inside her shifted, something that whispered, maybe this could be you, maybe this life is not as far away as it seems. And for the first time since that night, she allowed herself to imagine a different future, not just surviving but living. The turning point did not come with a grand announcement. It came quietly, like most important moments do, a chance conversation, a simple opportunity that others might have ignored, but she did not. She saw it for what it was, a door slightly open, waiting for someone brave enough to step through. She started learning new skills late at night, when the world was asleep and distractions were few. She taught herself things she never thought she could understand. She made mistakes, many of them, but each mistake became a lesson, each failure a step forward, and slowly, almost without realizing it, she began to change. Not just her circumstances, but herself. The woman who once stood outside in the rain, lost and broken, was becoming someone new, someone determined, someone focused, someone who refused to be defined by her past. And as months turned into years, her efforts began to show results, small at first, but meaningful enough to keep her going. There were still struggles, still moments of doubt, but they no longer controlled her. She had built something inside her stronger than fear, stronger than pain, and that strength carried her forward even when the path was uncertain. Success did not arrive overnight. It came in pieces, in small victories that slowly built into something greater. She worked harder than she ever had before, not because she had to, but because she wanted to, because she had found a purpose that gave her life direction and meaning. She saved every dollar she could. She invested in herself, in her future, in the dream she once thought was impossible, and over time that dream began to take shape. It became real, tangible, something she could see and touch, something she could call her own. And then one day she stood in front of a house, not just any house, but the very house she once called home, the same walls, the same door, the same place where everything fell apart and everything began. And as she held the keys in her hand, she felt a wave of emotion, so powerful it almost brought her to her knees. This was not about revenge, it was about closure. It was about proving to herself that she was capable, that she was strong, that she was more than the pain she had endured. And as she walked through that door this time, on her own terms, she realized something important. She had not just rebuilt her life, she had transformed it. Years had passed, but the memory of that night never left her, not as a wound, but as a reminder of how far she had come. And one evening, as she stood by the window looking out at the world she once struggled to survive, and she heard a knock on the door. For a moment time seemed to slow, and as she walked toward the door, a familiar feeling returned, not fear, not pain, but something quieter, something steady. And when she opened it, she saw him standing there, the man who once turned her away, the man who thought she would never rise again. He looked different, older, worn down by time and choices, and for a brief moment their eyes met, carrying years of unspoken words, and then he spoke, not with confidence, but with hesitation, as if unsure of his place in this new reality. But she did not need to hear his apology, she did not need his regret, because she had already found what she needed within herself: strength, dignity, peace, and as she stood there she realized that the power he once had over her was gone completely and forever. She smiled, not out of pride, not out of anger, but out of understanding, because sometimes the greatest victory is not proving others wrong, but proving yourself right, and as she gently closed the door she felt a sense of peace that no success, no wealth, could ever replace. She had lost everything once, but in that loss she found herself, and in finding herself she gained everything she ever truly needed, and her story did not end there, because this was never just about what she lost or what she gained, it was about who she became along the way. And that is a story no one can ever take away from her. And after that door closed, something inside her felt lighter, not because the past disappeared, but because it no longer controlled her. The silence in the house was no longer empty, it was peaceful, it was hers. Every wall, every corner, every memory had been rewritten, not by time, but by her strength. And as she walked slowly through the rooms she once left behind, in pain she no longer saw loss, she saw growth, she saw the woman she had become. She touched the walls gently, as if speaking to them, as if telling them she was no longer the same person who once cried. Here she had returned, not broken, but rebuilt, not defeated, but stronger than ever, and that realization filled her with a quiet power, the kind that does not need to be loud, the kind that lives deep inside and never fades. Life did not suddenly become perfect, because success does not erase scars, but it teaches you how to carry them differently. She still had moments where memories would return like shadows at sunset, reminding her of nights she wished to forget, but instead of running from them she faced them with calm understanding, because those moments no longer defined her, they refined her. She began helping others, women who were standing where she once stood, lost, uncertain, afraid. She saw herself in their eyes, and she refused to let them believe they were alone. She shared her story not for attention, but for connection, not for praise, but for purpose. And with every life she touched she healed a part of herself she did not even know was still hurting. There was a young woman she met one day, sitting quietly with the same empty look she once carried, and without hesitation she sat beside her, not as a stranger, but as someone who understood without needing words, and in that moment something powerful happened, not dramatic, not loud, but deeply real. A connection formed between two souls, one who had survived and one who was still trying. She listened with patience and spoke with honesty, telling her that pain does not last forever, that even the darkest nights eventually give way to light. And as the young woman looked at her with tears slowly fading into hope, she realized something: her journey was no longer just about her, it had become something bigger, something meaningful, something that would continue long after her own story was told. Time moved forward as it always does, but for her it carried a different feeling now. It was no longer something to fear, but something to embrace. Each day became an opportunity not just to succeed, but to live fully, to breathe deeply, to appreciate the simple things that once felt out of reach. She would wake up in the mornings with sunlight filling her home, and for a moment she would stand still, letting it touch her face, reminding herself that she made it not by luck, not by chance, but by courage, by persistence, by refusing to give up when giving up would have been easier. And yet life had one more lesson waiting for her, one she did not expect, one that would test not her strength, but her heart, because one day she received news that stopped her in her tracks. The man who once left her had fallen into difficult times, struggling in ways she once did. For a moment she stood still, memories rushing back, emotions rising, questions forming, and she realized that healing is not just about moving forward, sometimes it is about deciding who you want to be when the past comes back in a different form. She thought about everything: the pain, the nights, the struggle, the loneliness, and then she thought about who she had become: a woman of strength, a woman of compassion, a woman who understood that holding on to anger only keeps you tied to the past. And so she made a decision, not because he deserved it, but because she did. She chose peace, she chose to let go completely, not just in words, but in action, and that choice set her free in a way nothing else ever could. When she saw him again, it was not the same as before. There was no tension, no unspoken weight, just two people standing in a moment shaped by time and experience. He looked at her not with power, but with regret, and she looked at him not with pain, but with clarity. She spoke calmly, not to remind him of what he did, but to show him who she had become, and in that moment something shifted, not between them, but within her. She realized she no longer needed closure, because she had already given it to herself. After that encounter she returned home, not thinking about the past, but appreciating the present, the life she built, the peace she created, the strength she carried. Everything around her felt different, not because it changed, but because she did. She sat quietly for a while, reflecting not on what she lost, but on what she gained: resilience, wisdom, courage, and a deep understanding that sometimes the hardest moments in life are the ones that shape us into who we are meant to be. Studio Microphone Part 14. Her story began to spread not through noise, but through impact. People talked about her journey not because it was perfect, but because it was real, because it showed that no matter how far someone falls, they can rise again if they choose to keep going. She became a symbol not of success, but of possibility, and that meant more to her than anything else, because she knew there were still people out there standing in the same cold night she once stood in, waiting for a reason to believe things could change. Studio Microphone Part 15. Years passed and life continued to unfold in beautiful, unexpected ways, but one thing remained constant: her commitment to never forget where she came from, not to hold on to pain, but to remember her strength, to remember the promise she made to herself on that night. And sometimes she would sit quietly thinking about that moment, not with sadness, but with gratitude, because without it she would not be who she is today. Studio Microphone Part 16. There is something powerful about rebuilding your life from nothing, something that changes the way you see the world, the way you see yourself. She no longer feared losing things, because she knew she could always rebuild. She had done it once, and that was enough to prove she could do it again. That confidence became her foundation, stronger than any house, stronger than any success, because it came from within and nothing could take that away from her. Studio Microphone Part 17. She began to live not just for survival, not just for success, but for meaning. Every decision, every step carried intention. She valued time, relationships, peace, things that once felt secondary but now meant everything. And in that shift she found a deeper kind of happiness, not loud, not overwhelming, but steady and real, the kind that stays even in quiet moments, the kind that does not depend on anything outside of you. Studio Microphone Part 18. One evening as the sun began to set, she stood outside her home watching the sky change colors, and for a moment everything felt still, as if the world itself was pausing to acknowledge her journey. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, feeling the air fill her lungs, feeling the life she built around her and within her, and she smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because she had made peace with everything that once hurt her. Studio Microphone Part 19. People often ask how she did it, how she found the strength to keep going when everything was against her, and she always gives the same answer: she did not wait for strength to come, she created it step by step, day by day, choice by choice. Because strength is not something you are given, it is something you build through every moment you decide not to give up even when it feels impossible. Studio Microphone Part 20. And if there is one thing her story teaches, it is this: your lowest moment does not define your future, it only tests your willingness to rise again. No matter how dark it gets, no matter how alone you feel, there is always a path forward, even if you cannot see it yet. All it takes is one decision, one step, one belief that things can change, and when you hold on to that belief long enough, it begins to shape your reality in ways you never imagined. Studio Microphone Final Part. So if you ever find yourself standing in the cold with nothing left, feeling like the world has turned its back on you, remember her story. Remember that she once stood in that same place with the same fear, the same uncertainty, the same pain, and yet she chose to keep going. She chose to believe in a future she could not see, and that choice changed everything, not overnight, not easily, but inevitably, because when you refuse to give up on yourself, life eventually has no choice but to meet you halfway. And one day you will look back not at what broke you, but at what built you, and you will realize that losing everything was not the end, it was the beginning of becoming everything you were meant to be.